Family, we back. Hope your Hanukkah is going amazing. Shabbat is fire. We're going to continue on in the words of Flavius Josephus on the Maccabees, part 6. Let's keep it going. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, definitely check that out. And let's continue. When this epistle of the king was brought to ear, part 6. When this epistle of the king was brought to Eleazar, he wrote an answer to it with all the respect possible. Eleazar, the high priest, to King Ptolemy, sendeth greeting, and thou and thy queen Arsina, and thy children be well. We are entirely satisfied. When we received thy epistle, we greatly rejoiced at thy intention to the multitude gathered together. We read them, and thereby made them sensible of the piety thou hast towards God. We also showed them the 21 vials of gold, and 30 of silver, and the 5 large basins, and the table for the showbread, and as also the 100 talents for the sacrifices, and for the making of what shall be needful at the temple. Which things Andreas and Aristeus, those who honored friends of thine, have brought us, and truly they are persons of an excellent character, and of great learning, and worthy of thy virtue. Know then that we will gratify thee in what is for thy advantage, though we do what we used not do before. Though we do what we used not to do before, but we ought to make a return for the numerous acts of kindness which thou hast done to our countrymen. We immediately therefore offered sacrifices for thee and thy sister, which with thy children and friends, and the multitude made prayers that thy affairs may be to thy mind, and that thy kingdom may be preserved in peace, and that the translation of our law may come to the conclusion thou desirest, and be for thy advantage. We have also chosen 6 elders out of every tribe, whom we have sent, and the law with them. It will be thy part out of thy piety and justice to send back the law when it hath been translated, and to return those to us that bring in safety. Farewell. This was number 7. This was the reply which the high priest made, but it does not seem to be necessary to set down the names of 72 elders that were sent by Eleazar and carried the law, which yet were subjoined at the end of the epistle. However, I thought it not improper to give an account of those very valuable and artificially contrived vessels, which the king sent to God, and that all may see how great a regard the king had for God. For the king allowed a vast deal of expenses for these vessels, and came often to the workmen, and viewed their works, and suffered nothing of carelessness or negligence to be any damage to their operations. I will relate how rich they were, as well as I am able, although perhaps the nature of this history may not require such a description. But I imagine I shall thereby recommend the elegant taste and magnanimity of this king to those that read this history. 8. And first I will describe what belongs to the table. It was indeed the king's mind to make this table vastly large in its dimensions, but then he gave orders that they should learn what was the magnitude of the table which was already at Jerusalem, and how large it was, and whether there was a possibility of making one larger than it. And when he was informed of how large this was, which was already there, and that nothing hindered but a larger might be made, he said that he was willing to have one made that should be 5 times as large as the present table. But here his fear was that it might be then useless in their sacred ministrations by its too great largeness, for he desired that the gifts he presented them should not only be there for show, but should be useful also in their sacred ministrations, according to which reasoning, that the former table was made of so moderate a size for use and not for want of gold, he resolved that he would not exceed the former table in largeness, but would make it exceed it in the variety and elegancy of its materials, as he was sagacious in observing the nature of all things and of having a just notion of what was new and surprising. And where there were no sculptures, he would invent such as were proper by his own skill and would show them to the workmen. He commanded that such sculptures should now be made, and that those which were delineated should be most accurately formed by a constant regard to their delineation. 9. When therefore the workmen had undertaken this to make the table, they framed it in length 2 cubits and a half, and in breadth 1 cubit, and in height 1 cubit and a half. And this entire structure of work was of gold. They withal made a crown of a handbreadth round it, with waved work wreathed about it, and an engraving which imitated a cord, and was admirably turned on its 3 parts. For as they were of a triangular figure, every angle had the same dispositions of the sculptures, that when you turned them about, the very same form of them was turned about without any variation. Now that part of the crown that was enclosed under the table had its sculptures very beautiful, but that part which went round on the outside was more elaborately devoted them to God, and had paid respect to those that brought them, and had given them presents to be carried to the king. He dismissed them, and when they were to come to Alexandria, and Ptolemy heard that they were come, and that the 70 elders were come also, he presently sent for Andreas and Aristeus, his ambassadors, who came to him and delivered him the epistle which they brought him from the high priest, and made answer to all the questions he put them by word of mouth. He then made haste to meet the elders that came from Jerusalem for the interpretation of the laws, and he gave command that everybody who came on other occasions should be sent away, which was a thing surprising, and what he did not used to do. For those that were drawn thither upon such occasions used to come to him on the 5th day, but ambassadors at the month's end. But when he had sent those away, he waited for these men that were sent by Eleazar. But as the old men came in with presents, which the high priest had given them to bring to the king, and with the membranes with which they had their laws written in golden letters, he put questions to them concerning those books. And when they had taken off the covers wherein they were wrapped up, they showed him the membranes. So the king stood admiring the thinness of those membranes and the exactness of the junctures, which could not be perceived, so exactly were they connected one with another, and this he did for a considerable time. He then said that he returned them thanks to the coming for He then said that he returned them thanks for coming to him, and still greater thanks to him that sent them, and above all to that God whose laws they appeared to be. Then did the elders and those that were present with them cry out with one voice, and wished all happiness to the king, upon which he fell into tears by the violence of the pleasure he had, it being natural to men to afford the same indications in great joy that they do under sorrow. And when he had bidden them deliver the books to those that were appointed to receive them, he saluted them and said that it was but just to discourse in the first place of the errand they were sent about, and then went to address himself to themselves. He promised, however, that they would make this day on which they came to him remarkable and eminent every year through the whole course of his life, for their coming to him, and the victory which he gained over Antigonus by sea proved to be the very same day. He also gave orders that they should sup with him, and gave it in charge that they should have excellent lodgings provided for them in the upper part of the city. Now, 12. Now he that was appointed to take care of the reception of strangers, Nicanor by name, called for Dorotheus, whose duty it was to make provision for them, and bade him prepare for every one of them that should be requisite for their diet and way of living. which thing was ordered by the king after this manner. He took care that those that belonged to every city which did not use the same way of living, that all things should be prepared for them, according to the custom of those that came with him. But him, that being feasted according to the usual method of their own way of living, that they might be better pleased, and might not be uneasy at anything done to them from which they were naturally averse. And this was not done in the case of these men by Dorotheus, who was put into his office because of his great skill in such matters belonging to the common life. For he took care of all matters as concerned the reception of strangers, and appointed them double seats for them to sit on, according as the king had commanded him to do. For he had commanded that half of their seats should be set at his right hand, and the other half on his table, and took care that no respect should be omitted that could be shown them. And when they were thus set down, he bid Dorotheus to minister to all those that were to come to him from Judea, after the manner they used to be ministered to. For which cause he sent away their sacred heralds, and those that slew the sacrifices, and the rest that used to say grace, but called to one of those that were come to him, whose name was Eleazar, who was a priest, and desired him to say grace. They got the reference for that. Gotta love references. Who then stood in the midst of them and prayed that all prosperity might attend the king and those that were his subjects, upon which any acclamation was made by the whole company with joy and a great noise. And when that was over, they fell to eating their supper and to the enjoyment of what was set before them. And at a little interval afterward, when the king thought of sufficient time had interposed, he began to talk philosophically to them, and asked every one of them a philosophical question, and such a one as might give light in those inquiries. And when they had explained all the problems that had been proposed by the king about every point, he was well pleased with their answers. This took up the 12 days in which they were treated, and he that pleases may learn the particular questions in that book of Aristides, in which he wrote on this very occasion. And while not the king only, but the philosopher Menedemus also admired them, and said that all things were governed by providence, and that it was probable that thence it was for such force or beauty was discovered in these men's words. They then left off asking any more questions. Meaning, I guess they were satisfied with their answers and didn't have any more questions. But the king said that he had gained very great advantages by their coming. So it was mutually beneficial, for that he had received this profit from them, that he had learned how he ought to rule his subjects, and he gave order that them should have every one 3 talents given to them, and that those that were to conduct them to their lodging should do it. So the people that are going to send them to the places we're going to let them stay and rest here, make sure you give them their 3 talents of gold. Accordingly, when 3 days were over, Demetrius took them and went over to the causeway 7 furlongs long. It was a bank in the sea to an island. And when they had gone over the bridge, he proceeded to the northern parts and showed them where they should meet, which was in a house that was built near the shore, and was a quiet place and fit for their discoursing together about their work. When he had brought them thither, he entreated them now that they had all things about them which they wanted for the interpretation of their law, that they would suffer nothing to interrupt him in their work. Accordingly, they made an accurate interpretation with great zeal and great pains. And this they continued to do till the 9th hour of the day, after which time they relaxed and took care of their body, while their food was provided for them in great plenty. Besides, Dorotheus at the king's command, brought them a great deal of what was provided for the king himself. But in the morning they came to the court and saluted Ptolemy, and then went away to their former place, where when they had washed their hands and purified themselves, they betook themselves to the interpretation of the laws. Nor when the law was transcribed and the labor of the interpretation was over, which came to its conclusion in 72 days, Demetrius gathered all the Jews together to one place where the laws were translated and where the interpretations were, and read them over. The multitude did also approve of those elders that were interpreters of the law. They withal commended Demetrius for his proposal as the investor of what was greatly for their happiness, and they desired that he would give leave to their rulers also to read the law. Moreover, they all, both the priests and the ancientest of the elders and the principal men of their commonwealth, made it their request that since the interpretation was happily finished, it might continue in the state it now was and might not be altered. And when they all commended that determination of theirs, they enjoined. So they got together. They all agreed together that if one observed either anything superfluous, however you pronounce it, superfluous, or anything omitted, that he would take a view of it again and have it laid before them and correct it. To which a wise action of theirs, that when the thing was judged to have been well done, it might continue forever. So the king rejoiced when he saw that this design of this nature was brought to perfection to so great advantage, and he was chiefly delighted with hearing the laws read to him, and was astonished at the deep meaning and wisdom of the legislator. And he began discourse with Demetrius, how it came to pass that when this legislation was so wonderful, no you, either of the poets or of the historians, had made mention of it. Demetrius made an answer that no one durst be so bold as to touch upon the description of these laws, because they were divine and venerable, and because some that had attempted it were afflicted by God. He also told them that Theopompus was desirous of writing somewhat about them, but was thereupon disturbed in his mind for above 30 days' time. And upon some intermission of his distemper, he appeased God by prayer, as suspecting that his madness proceeded from that cause. So now they're saying people who had initially tried to transcribe the law were being punished and afflicted with certain conditions. And so people were starting to be afraid of trying to rewrite and scribe and translate the laws that were given to the Hebrews for the Greeks and Romans to have their own copy. Interesting. He appeased, nay, indeed, he further saw in a dream that his distemper befell him while he indulged too great a curiosity about divine matters, and was desirous of publishing them among common men. But when he left off that attempt, he recovered under his understanding again. Moreover, he informed them of the Theodectes, the tragic poet, concerning whom it was reported that when in a certain dramatic representation he was desirous to make mention of things that were contained in the sacred books, he was afflicted with a darkness in his eyes. And upon his being conscious of the occasion of his distemper and appeasing God by prayer, he was freed from that affliction. So we're seeing again, they're saying a lot of contemporary writers and scribes of the time who had initially sought to do the same thing, sought to create a recreation of the books in other languages for the people to understand outside of the Hebrews. They were afflicted greatly, and the only way they were able to remove these afflictions for themselves was by praying and abstaining from continuing that work. Very interesting. And These are the works of Flavius Josephus. This sounds like this could have came right out of the Bible. And when the king had received these books from Demetrius, as we have said already, he adored them and gave order that great care should be taken of them, that they might remain uncorrupted. He also desired that the interpreters would come often to him out of Judea, and that both on account of the respects that he would pay them and on account of the presents he would make them. For he said, it was now but just to send them away. Although if of their own accord they would come to him hereafter, they should obtain all that their own wisdom might justly require, and what his generosity was able to give them. So he sent them away and gave to every one of them 3 garments of the best sort, and 2 talents of gold, and a cup of the value of 1 talent, and the furniture of the room wherein they feasted. And these were the things he presented them. But by them he sent to Eleazar, the high priest, 10 beds with feet of silver. 10 beds with feet of silver. It's pretty nice. And the furniture to them belonging, and a cup of value of 30 talents. And besides these 10 garments, and purple, and a very beautiful crown, and 100 pieces of the finest woven linen. Also vials and dishes and vessels for pouring, and 2 golden cisterns to be dedicated to God. He also desired that by an epistle that he would give these interpreters leave if any of them were desirous of coming to him, because he highly valued a conversation with men of such learning, and should be very willing to lay out his wealth upon such men. And this was what came to the Jews, and was much to their glory and honor. From Ptolemy Philadelphus. Chapter 3, how the kings of Asia honored the nation of Jews and made them citizens of those cities which they built. The Jews also obtained honors from the kings of Asia when they became their auxiliaries. For Seleucus Nicator made them citizens in those cities which he built in Asia and in Lower Syria, and in the metropolis itself, Antioch, and gave them privileges equal to those of the Macedonians and Greeks, who were the inhabitants, insomuch that these privileges continue to this very day. An argument for which you have in this, that whereas the Jews do not make us of oil prepared by foreigners, do not make use of oil prepared by foreigners, they receive a certain sum of money from the proper officers belonging to their exercises as the value of that oil, which money. Shout to the family for making me a great smoothie today, man. Just to pause and put an intermission. It was blueberries and bananas, right? And then they put matcha green tea powder, beetroot powder, flax seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, frozen blueberries, frozen bananas, coconut milk, matcha, beetroot. Hey. It's good right there, man. Good for the soul. Good for the soul. So glowing after a couple of those, I promise you. Where we at? Which money when the people of Antioch would have deprived them of in the last year, Eusebius or Mucanius, who was then president of Syria, preserved to them. And when the people of Alexandria and Antioch did after that, at the time that Vespasian and Titus his son governed the habitable earth, pray that these privileges of citizens might be taken away, they did not obtain their request, in which behavior anyone may discern the equity and generosity of the Romans, especially of Vespasian and Titus, who, although they had a great deal of pains in the war against the Jews, a great deal of pains, and were exasperated against them, meaning, man, they were spent by the time they finished fighting. They had such a zeal of the spirit when they fought, because they did not deliver up their weapons to them, but continued to war to the very last. Yet did not they take away any of their aforementioned privileges belonging to them as citizens, but restrained their anger and overcame the prayers of the Alexandrians and Antiochians, who were a very powerful people, insomuch that they did not yield to them, neither out of their favor to these people, nor out of their old grudge at those whose wicked opposition they had subdued in the war. Nor would they alter any of the ancient favors granted to the Jews, but said that those who had borne arms against them and fought them had suffered punishment already, and that it was not just to deprive those that had not offended the privileges they enjoyed. Section 2, we also know that Marcus Agrippa was of the like disposition toward the Jews, for when the people of Ionia were very angry, or Jonia, people of Jonia were very angry at them and besought Agrippa, that they only might have those privileges of citizens which Antiochus, the grandson of Antiochus, grandson of Seleucus, who by the Greeks was called the God, had bestowed on them and desired. Shout to you Greeks, worshiping these gods. Had bestowed on them and desired that if the Jews were to be joint partakers with them, they might be obliged to worship the gods they themselves worshipped. But when these matters were brought to trial, the Jews prevailed and obtained leave to make use of their own customs, and this under the patronage of Nicholas of Damascus. For Agrippa gave sentence that he could not innovate, and if anyone hath a mind to know this matter accurately, let him pursue the 123rd and 124th books of the history of Nicholas. Now, as to this determination of Agrippa, it is not so much to be admired, for at one time our nation had not made war against Romans. But one may be well astonished at the generosity of Vespasian and Titus, that after so great wars and contests which they had from us, they should use such moderation. But I will now return to that part of my mystery whence I made the present digression. Now it happened that in the reign of Antiochus, the Great, who ruled over all Asia, that the Jews as well as the inhabitants of Cilicia suffered greatly, and their land was sorely harassed. For while he was at war with Ptolemy Philopator, and with his son, who was called Epiphanes, it fell out that these nations were equally sufferers, both when he was beaten and when he beat the others, so that they were very like a ship in a storm, which is tossed by the waves on both sides. And just thus were they in their situation in the middle between Antiochus's prosperity and its change to adversity. But at length, Antiochus had beaten Ptolemy. He seized upon Judea, and when Philopator was dead, his son sent out a great army under Scopas, the general of his forces, against the inhabitants of Cilicia, who took many of their cities, and in particular our nation, which, when he fell upon them, went over to him. Yet it was not long afterward when Antiochus overcame Scopas in a battle fought at the fountains of Jordan and destroyed a great party of his army. Yet it was not Yet it was not long afterward, meaning in a very short order and a short time later, when Antiochus overcame Scopas in a battle fought at the fountains of Jordan and destroyed a great part of his army. And afterwards, when Antiochus subdued those cities of Cilicia, which Scopas had gotten into his possession, and Samaria with them, the Jews of their own accord went over to him and received him into the city Jerusalem and gave plentiful provision. So this is after Antiochus subdued the cities of Cilicia. The Jews of their own accord went over to him and received him into the city and gave plentiful provision. So they welcomed him into the city with open arms, and giving him all this provision so that him and his army would be were well taken care of in the city, and they gave him a hospitable welcome. Gave plentiful provision to all his armies and to his elephants, and readily assisted him when he besieged the garrison. Which they assisted him when he besieged it. So now they're working together with Antiochus, which was in the citadel of Jerusalem. Wherefore Antiochus thought it be just to requite the Jews' diligence and zeal in his service. So he wrote to the generals of his armies and to his friends and gave testimony to the good behavior of the Jews toward him, and informed them what rewards he had resolved to bestow on them for their behavior. I will set down presently the epistles themselves which he wrote to the generals concerning them, but will first produce the testimony of Polybius of Megalopolis. For thus does he speak in the 16th book of his history. Now Scopas, the general of Ptolemy's army, went in haste to the superior parts of the country, and in the winter time overthrew the nations of the Jews. He also saith in the book that when Scopas was conquered by Antiochus received Batanea and Samaria and Abila and Gadara, and that a while afterward there came into him those Jews that inhabited near the temple, which was called Jerusalem, concerning which, although I have more to say, and particularly concerning the presence of God about that time, about that temple, yet do I put off that history till another opportunity. This is it which Polybius relates, but we will return to the series of history when we have first produced the epistles of King Antiochus. So it's very interesting because, in a lot of historical narratives, a lot of the historians never talk about any conflicts or any campaigns in which the Jews have reported to actually help Antiochus fight and war with him together, and then Antiochus wants to reward them for their good behavior. Never heard this, man. So reading is fun to mentus. You know what I mean? Ghetto, you don't read no books. All right then. Now Scopas, the general of Ptolemy's army, went in haste. I'm sorry, I think too fast. Don't go chasing waterfalls. I'm sorry. I just be doing too much. Yep. Dara, that while afterward, Jews had inhabited. And that a while afterward, there came into him those Jews that inhabited near the temple, which was called Jerusalem. That temple was called Jerusalem. Ooh. Concerning which, although I have more to say, and particularly concerning the presence of God about that temple. So the temple was literally called Jerusalem. Crazy. Yet do I put off that history till another opportunity. This is which Polybius relates. But we will return to the series of history when we have first produced the epistles of King Antiochus. King Antiochus to Ptolemy sendeth greeting. Since the Jews, so I'm going to assume this is King Antiochus, since the Jews, upon our first entrance on their country, demonstrated their friendship toward us. Demonstrated friendship. And when we came to their inner city, Jerusalem, received us in a splendid manner. Jesus. And came to meet us with their senate, and gave abundance of provision to our soldiers and to the elephants, and joined with us in ejecting the garrison of the Egyptians that were in the citadel. Oh, okay, well, they got together, teamed up to kick some Egyptian booties. I got the Egyptians up out of the the enemy of my enemy, man, is my friend. At least while we got this common threat to get rid of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. While we're fighting this common foe, we both have something to gain by defeating this person and taking them down. So from that retrospect, I could see why the Jews, the Hebrews would fight with Antiochus and his army to take out the Egyptians. It is a mutually beneficial conquest if we work together to defeat these Egyptians. As we know, the Egyptians had previously had Jerusalem under its heel and in bondage and in slavery. So why would we not, as intelligent military leaders, use our military combined with yours to attack this enemy on multiple fronts? Listen, that makes perfect sense. We have thought fit to reward them and to retrieve the condition of their city, which hath been greatly depopulated by such accidents as have befallen its inhabitants, and to bring those that have been scattered abroad back to the city, and in the first place we have determined, on accounts of their piety towards God, to bestow on them as a pension for their sacrifices of animals, that are fit for sacrifice, for wine and oil and frankincense, the value of 20,000 pieces of silver. Shit. This is the section Antiochus rewards the Jews, and 6 sacred artabae of fine flour, with 1,460 medimni of wheat and 375 medimni of salt. And these payments I would have fully paid them, as I have sent orders to you. I would also have the work about the temple finished, and the cloisters, and if there be anything else that ought to be rebuilt, and for the materials of wood, let it be brought them out of Judea itself, and out of the other countries, and out of Libanus, tax free. And the same I would have observed as to those other materials which will be necessary in order to render the temple more glorious, and let all of the nation live according to the laws of their own country. So Antiochus was going to let them live according to the law of their own country, give them the provisions needed, tax-free, to rebuild the temple in a more glorious fashion, or to continue to expand the temple, and also food provisions, etc., for them, helping them to defeat their mutual enemy, the Egyptians. Okay? And let all of the nation live according to the laws of their own, and was going to allow them to live under their own law. Well, at least this particular perspective of Flavius Josephus, we gonna get into him, says anyway, because Flavius Josephus, of course, he's going to be writing in a favorable light about those who allowed him not to have to get his head chopped off, because just very quickly, Flavius Josephus was formerly a military head in the Hebrew army, the Jewish, quote-unquote, Jew army. He was formerly a military head in that army. and after he got captured, switched sides. He was also a brilliant orator and a writer and a scholar, and he literally convinced the Flavians that, from his perspective, it was Titus Flavius who was the savior of the Jewish people, and that he, if given the opportunity, would help them sway the Jewish people toward their side, or the Hebrews toward their side, not militaristically, but through the media, the content, through the propaganda, through the pushing of a narrative and an agenda that aligned with what their beliefs were, showing them that Titus Flavius was the savior that they were waiting for according to their scriptures. You can't make this up. Like, he literally went from being a military leader for the Hebrew armies to being a arbitrator and a proponent for pushing news stories and agenda and books that were written specifically to illustrate how the Flavians were the saviors the Hebrews have been waiting for this whole time, according to their own belief system, and they should praise and honor the Flavians for coming in and taking over, not be against them. So, we gonna cook on that, brother. We gonna cook. Let's get back to Flavius Josephus on the Maccabees. We gonna definitely cook on Flavius Josephus himself, who he used to be, how he got this role amongst the Flavians. Man. So, let all the nation and let the Senate and priests and the scribes of the temple and the sacred singers be discharged from poll money and the crown tax. So they don't even got to pay these taxes no more. They don't have to pay voting taxes. They don't have to pay a tax to the crown and other taxes also. And that the city may sooner recover its inhabitants. Wow. So he was literally going to let them repopulate and regrow and give them the provisions in which to do so. I grant a discharge from taxes for 3 years to the present inhabitants, and to such as shall come to it until the month Hyper Heretius. We also discharge them for the future from a third part of their taxes. Wow. That the losses they have sustained may be repaired, and all those citizens that have been carried away and are become slaves, we grant them and their children their freedom, and give order that their substance be restored to them. Get them all their stuff back, man. Enemy of my enemy is my homie. The enemy of my enemy, you owe. Oh, those your ops too? Brother. Brother, those your ops too? Oh, those your ops? My brother, where you been at all this time? And these were the contents of this epistle. He also published a decree through all his kingdom in honor of the temple, which contained what follows. It shall be lawful for no foreigner to come within the limits of the temple round about, which thing is forbidden also to the Jews, unless to those who, according to their own custom, have purified themselves. Be respectful. Be respectful. Respect their rules, man. Respect their customs. Nor let any flesh of horses or of mules or of asses be brought into the city, whether they be wild or tame, nor that of leopards or foxes or hares, and in general that of any animal which is forbidden for the Jews to eat. And this is the decree of King Antiochus to Ptolemy after they helped get the Egyptians up out of there. Nor let the skins be brought into it, nor let any such animal be bred up in the city. Let them only be permitted to use the sacrifices derived from their forefathers, with which they have been obliged to make acceptable atonements to God. And he that transgresseth any of these orders, let him pay to the priest 3,000 drachmae of silver. Moreover, this Antiochus bare testimony to our piety and fidelity. In an epistle of this written, he was informed of a sedition in Phrygia and Lydia, at which time he was in the superior provinces, wherein he commanded Zeuxis, the general of his forces, and his most intimate friend, to send some of our nation out of Babylon into Phrygia. The epistle was this. Gotta love when they have unnecessary empty pages. Oh no, they ain't supposed to be empty. Did they really just take it out? Oh, that's crazy. They really took it out the book. Disrespectful. I gotta try to find page 316 in another version of this book. Dang. Oh man, then sent him to the king before him and told him that he would soon follow him, for he was now more willing to go. They really deleted a page. Bro, they don't be wanting the truth to get out, man. They do not be wanting the truth to get out. For he was more willing to go to the king by encouragement of the ambassador, who earnestly persuaded him to come into Egypt and promised him that he would take care that he should obtain everything that he desired of Ptolemy. For he was highly pleased with his frank and liberal temper, and with the gravity of his deportment. And when Ptolemy's ambassador was coming to Egypt, shout out to CT. And when Ptolemy's ambassador was coming to Egypt, he told the king of the thoughtless temper of Onias, and informed him of goodness of the disposition of Joseph, and that he was coming to him to excuse the multitude, as not having done him any harm, for that he was their patron. In short, he was so very large and encomiums, and he was so very large and encomiums upon the young man, that he disposed both the king and his wife Cleopatra to have a kindness for him before he came. So Joseph sent his friends to Samaria and borrowed money of them. Let me start this again. When Ptolemy's ambassador came into Egypt, he told the king of the thoughtless temper of Onias, and informed him of the goodness, of the disposition of Joseph, and that he was coming to him to excuse the multitude, as not having done him any harm, for that he was their patron. In short, he was so very large in his encomiums upon the young man, that he disposed both the king and his wife Cleopatra to have a kindness for him before he came. So Joseph sent his friends to Samaria and borrowed money of them, and got ready what was necessary for his journey: garments and cups and beasts for burden, which amounted to about 20,000 drachmae, and went to Alexandria. Now this is a historical source that keeps saying they were in Egypt. Okay. Now it happened that at this time, all the principal men and rulers of that family went up into the cities of Syria and Phoenicia to bid for their taxes. For every year the king sold them to the men of the greatest power in every city. So these men saw Joseph journeying on the way, and laughed at him for his poverty and meanness. But when he came to Alexandria and heard that King Ptolemy was at Memphis, he went up thither to meet him. and went up thither to meet him, which happened as the king was sitting in his chariot with his wife and with his friend Anthenion, who was the very person who had been ambassador at Jerusalem and been entertained by Joseph. As soon, therefore, as Anthenion saw him, he presently made him known to the king, how good and generous a young man he was. So Ptolemy saluted him first and desired him to come up into his chariot. And as Joseph sat there, he began to complain of the management of Onias, to which he answered, "Forgive him on account of his age, for thou canst not certainly be unacquainted with this, that old men and infants have their minds exactly alike. But thou shalt have from us who are young men everything thou desirest, and thou shalt have no cause to complain." With this good humor and pleasantry of the young man, the king was delighted. The king was so delighted that he began already, as though he had long experience of him, to have still greater affection for him, inasmuch that he bade him take his diet in the king's palace and be a guest at his own table every day. But when the king was come to Alexandria, the principal men of Syria saw him sitting with the king and were much offended at it, because the custom was that an Egyptian wasn't allowed to sit or eat with the Hebrews. It was a reproach. It was disgusting. They were seen as beneath them. Like, how could you eat with these dogs? How could you eat with these monkeys? How could you eat with these savages, these uncouth animals? How dare you? Don't you know you're Egyptian? And when the day came on which the king was to let the taxes of the cities to farm, and those that were the principal of men of dignity in their several countries were to bid for them the sum of the taxes together of Cilicia and Phoenicia and Judea with Samaria, as were bidden to, came to 8,000 talents. Hereupon Joseph accused the bidders as having agreed together to estimate the value of the taxes at too low a rate, and he promised that he would himself give twice as much for them, but for those who did not pay, he would send the king their whole substance, for this privilege was sold together with the taxes themselves. The king was pleased to hear that offer, and because it augmented his revenues, he said he would confirm the sale of the taxes to him. But when he asked them this question, whether he had any sureties that would be bound for the payment of the money, he answered very pleasantly, "I will give such security, and those of persons good and responsible, and which you shall have no reason to distrust." And when he bade him name them, who they were, he replied, "I give thee no other persons, O king, for my sureties than thyself and this thy wife, and you shall be security for both parties." So Ptolemy laughed at the proposal and granted him the farming of the taxes without any sureties. This procedure was a sore grief to those that came from the cities in Egypt, who were utterly disappointed, and they returned everyone of their own country with shame. Everyone to their own country with shame. But Joseph took with him 2,000 foot soldiers from the king, where he desired he might have some assistance. That's a little bit more than some assistance, Joseph, in order to force such as were refractory in the cities to pay. And borrowing of the king's friends at Alexandria 500 talents, he made haste back into Syria. And when he was taken at Ascalon and demanded the taxes of the people of Ascalon, they refused to pay anything and affronted him. Also, upon which he seized upon. I'm so sorry, guys. Many apologies. Which he seized upon them 20 of the principal men and slew them. Hey, Joseph wasn't playing no games. And gathered what they had together and sent it all to the king and informed him what he had done. Ptolemy admired the prudent conduct of the man and commended him for what he had done and gave him leave to do as he pleased. When the Syrians heard of this, they were astonished, and having before them a sad example in men of Ascalon that were slain, they opened their gates and willingly admitted Joseph and paid their taxes. I bet they did. And when the inhabitants of Scythopolis attempted to affront him and would not pay those taxes which they formerly used to pay without disputing about them, he slew also the principal men of that city and sent their effects to the king. By this means he gathered great wealth together and made vast gains by this farming of the tax. Damn, Joseph was a G, huh? Multicolored coat wasn't no joke. And he made use of the estates he had thus gotten in order to support his authorities. As thinking it a piece of prudence to keep what had been the occasion and foundation of his present good fortune. And this he did by the assistance of what was already possessed of what he was already possessed of. For he privately sent many presents to the king and to Cleopatra and to their friends and to all that were powerful about the court, and thereby purchased their goodwill to himself. So he's a man that understood how politics is played and how to butter the bread, so to speak, how to grease the wheels of diplomacy, of politics. Take your pick what you call it. This good fortune he enjoyed for 22 years and was become the father of 7 sons by one wife. He had also another son whose name was Hyrcanus by his brother Salamius' daughter. Crazy. Whom he married on the following occasion. He once came to Alexandria with his brother, who had along with him a daughter already marriageable, in order to give her in wedlock to some of the Jews of chief dignity there. In order to give her in wedlock to some of the Jews of chief dignity there. So he wanted to, get her married to somebody that was well-to-do. He then supped with the king, and falling in love with an actress that was of great beauty, came into the room where they feasted and told his brother of it, and entreated him because a Jew is forbidden by their law to come near a foreigner, to conceal his offense and to be kind and subservient to him, and to give him an opportunity of fulfilling his desires. Upon which his brother unwillingly entertained the proposal of serving him, and adorned him his own daughter, and brought her to him by night, and put her into his bed. Nasty work. And Joseph listen, I can't say it's nasty work. It's just not my custom. I don't plan on doing this magnitude. Do I plan on, Most High willing and the Most High giving me the intelligence and the foresight to help in such matters when my children come of age? Of course, I will be there as a guiding voice and as a help and as a counsel. But to say I would just, have one of my children laying in wait for somebody, I think that's a bit much. I don't think I could do that. I just wasn't around in those times. I don't have those sensibilities. And Joseph, being disordered with drink, knew not who he was, and so lay with his brother's daughter. And this he did many times, and loved her exceedingly, and said to his brother that he loved this actress so well that he should run the hazard of his life if he must part with her, and yet probably the king would not give him leave to take her with him. But his brother bade him be in no concern about that matter, and told him he might enjoy her whom he loved without any danger, and might have her for his wife, and opened the truth of the matter to him, and assured him that he chose rather to have his own daughter abused than to overlook him and to see him come to public disgrace. Man, think about that's crazy. Think about that. That's brotherly love right there, I guess. So Joseph commended him for this his brotherly love, and married his daughter, and by her begat a son whose name was Hyrcanus, as we said before. And when this, his youngest son, showed at 13 years old a mind that was both courageous and wise, and was greatly envied by his brethren, as being of a genius much above them, and such a one as they might well envy, Joseph had once a mind to know which of his sons had the best disposition to virtue. And when he sent them severally, to those that had then the best reputation for instructing youth, the rest of his children, by reason of their sloth and unwillingness to take pains, returned to him foolish and unlearned. After them he sent out the youngest, Hyrcanus, and gave him 300 yoke of oxen, and bid him to go 2 days' journey into the wilderness, and sow the land there, and yet kept back privately the yokes of oxen that coupled them together. When Hyrcanus came to the place and found he had no yokes with them, he contemned the drivers of the oxen, who advised him to send some to his father and bring them some yokes. But he, thinking that he ought not to lose his time while they should be sent to bring him the yokes, he invented a kind of stratagem in what suited an aged elder than his own. So the idea, he come up with a plan that was, far beyond his years. He was wise beyond his years. For he slew 10 yoke of the oxen, and distributed their flesh among the laborers, and cut their hides into several pieces, and made him yokes, and yoked the oxen together with them, by which means he sowed as much land as his father had appointed him to sow, and returned to him. And when he was come back, his father was mightily pleased with his sagacity, and commended the sharpness of his understanding, and his boldness in what he did. And he still loved him the more, as if he were his only genuine son, while his brethren were much troubled about it. Whew, his genius. You could be so smart sometimes that it can literally intimidate people, and can make people not only jealous of you, but envious to the point of actually thinking of negative things they could do to you, ways they could steal from you, acts of violence they could commit towards you, etc., etc. But when one told him that Ptolemy had a son just born, and that all the principal men of Syria and the other countries subject to him were to keep a festival on account of the child's birthday, and went away in haste with great retinues to Alexandria, he was himself indeed hindered from going by old age. But he made trial of his sons, whether any of them would be willing to go to the king. And when the elder sons excused themselves from going, and said they were not courtiers good enough for such conversation, and advised him to send their brothers Hyrcanus, he gladly hearkened to that advice, and called Hyrcanus and asked him whether he would go to the king, and whether it was agreeable to him to go or not. And upon his promise that he would go, and his saying that he should not want much money for his journey, because he would live moderately, and that 10,000 drachmae would be sufficient, he was pleased with his son's prudence. After a little while, the son advised the father not to send presents to the king from thence, but to give him a letter to his steward at Alexandria, that he might furnish him with money for purchasing what should be most excellent and most precious. So he thinking that the expense of 10 talents would be enough for presents to be made to the king, and commending his son as giving him good advice, wrote to Arion, his steward, that managed all his money matters at Alexandria, which money was not less than 300 talents on his account. For Joseph sent the money he received in Syria to Alexandria, and when the day appointed for the payment of the taxes to the king, he wrote to Arion to pay them. So when the son had asked his father for a letter to this steward and had received it, he made haste to Alexandria. And when he was gone, his brethren wrote all to the king, his friends, that they should destroy him. But when he was to come to Alexandria, he delivered his letter to Arion, who asked him how many talents there he would have, hoping he would ask for no more than 10 or a little more. He said he wanted 1,000 talents. Yeah, 10 plus 9 and 90, bruh. Give me all that. At which the steward was angry and rebuked him as one that intended to live extravagantly. And he let him know that his father had gathered together his estate by painstaking and resisting his inclinations, and wished him to imitate the example of his father. He assured him withal that he would give him but 10 talents, and that for a present to the king also. The son was irritated at this and threw Arion into prison. When Arion's wife had informed Cleopatra of this, with her entreaty that she would rebuke the child for what he had done, for Arion was in great esteem with her. Cleopatra informed the king of it, and Ptolemy sent for Hyrcanus, and told him that he wondered when he was sent to him by his father, that he had not yet come into his presence, but had laid the steward in prison. And he gave order, therefore, that he should come to him and give an account of the reason of what he had done. And they report that the answer he made to the king's messenger was this, that there was law of this that forbade a child that was born to taste of the sacrifice before he had been at the temple and sacrificed to God. That there was a law of his that forbade a child that was born to taste of the sacrifice before he'd been at the temple and sacrificed to God. According to which way of reasoning he did not himself come in expectation of the present he was to make to him, as to one who had been his father's benefactor, and that he had punished the slave for disobeying his commands, for it mattered not whether a master was little or great, so that unless we punish such as these, thou thyself mayest also expect to be despised by thy subjects. Upon hearing this, his answer, he fell a laughing, and wondered at the great soul of the child. 9. When Arion was apprised that this was the king's disposition, and that he had no way to help himself, he gave the child 1,000 talents and was let out of prison. So after 3 days were over, Hyrcanus came and saluted the king and queen. They saw him with pleasure and feasted him in an obliging manner. Out of respect they bare to his father. So he came to the merchants privately and bought 100 toys, that he learning and were in the flower of their ages, each at a talent apiece. Wow, doing a lot. Also, he bought 100 maidens, each at the same price as the other. Sheesh. And when he was invited to feast with the king among the principal men of the country, he sat down the lowest of them all, because he was little regarded as a child in his age still, and this by those who placed everyone according to their dignity. Now when all those that sat with him had laid the bones of the several parts on a heap before Hyrcanus, for they had themselves taken away the flesh belonging to them, till the table where he sat was filled full with them, Trypho, who was the king's jester, that was appointed for jokes and laughter at festivals, was now asked by the guests that sat at the table to expose him to laughter. So he stood by the king and said, Dost thou not see, my lord, the bones that lie by Hyrcanus? By this multitude thou mayest conjecture that his father made all Syria as bare as he had made these bones. And the king, laughing at what Trypho said and asking of Hyrcanus how he came to have so many bones before him, he replied, very rightfully, my lord, for they are dogs that eat the flesh and the bones together, as these thy guests have done, looking in the meantime at those guests. For there is nothing before them, but they are men that eat the flesh and cast away the bones, as I, who am also a man, have now done. Upon which the king, admired at his answer, which was so wisely made, and bade them all make an acclamation as a mark of their approbation of his jest, which was a truly facetious one. On the next day, Hyrcanus, went to every one of the king's friends and of the men powerful at the court and saluted them, but still inquired of the servants what present they would make the king on his son's birthday. And when some said that they would give 12 talents, and others of greater dignity would everyone give according to the quantity of their riches, he pretended to everyone to be grieved that he was not able to bring so large a present, for that he had no more than 5 talents. And when the servants heard what he said, they told their masters, and they rejoiced in the prospect that Joseph would be disapproved and would make the king angry by the smallness of his present. When the day came, the others, even those that brought the most, offered the king not above 20 talents. But Hyrcanus gave every one of the 100 boys and 100 maidens that he had brought a talent apiece for them to carry, and introduced them, the boys to the king and the maidens to Cleopatra, every boy wondering at expecting richness of presents, even the king and the queens themselves. He set them up. He set them all up. Y'all not, word? Yeah, I only got a little bit of money. Oh, dang, all right, so we only got to give, if he only got 20 talents, 5 talents, if we give 20 talents, we've given 4 times more. But he decided to give each of his handmaidens, which was 100 of them, and each of his servants, 100 of them, 1 talent apiece. So he gave 200 talents, each one of his servants presenting 1 at a time. So not only did he present more money, he did it in such a show of majesty and prestige and dominance and opulence and being in servitude to the king and queen. Man, he made a show of it, baby. He made a show of it. Everybody wondering at the unexpected richness of the presents, even the king and queen themselves. He also presented those that attended about the king with gifts to the value of a great number of talents, that he might escape the danger he was in from them. For to these it was that Hyrcanus's brethren had written to destroy him. Now Ptolemy admired at the young man's magnanimity. You know, he's got charisma, and commanded him to ask what gift he pleased, but he desired nothing else to be done for him by the king than to write his father and brethren about him. So when the king had paid him very great respects and had given him very large gifts, and had written to his father and to his brethren and all his commanders and officers about him, he sent him away. But when his brethren heard that Hyrcanus had received such favors from the king and was returning home with great honor, they went out to meet him and to destroy him. And that with the privity of their father, for he was angry at him for the large sum of money that he bestowed for presents, and had no concern for his preservation. However, Joseph concealed the anger he had at his son out of fear of the king. And when Hyrcanus's brethren came to fight him, he slew many others of those that were with him, as also 2 of his brethren themselves. But the rest of them, I'm so sorry, let me read that again. And when Hyrcanus's brethren came to fight him, he slew many others of those that were with them. So he slew all their helpers and assistants, and also 2 of his brethren themselves, and 2 of his brothers. Damn. but the rest of them escaped to Jerusalem to their father. But when Hyrcanus came to the city where nobody would receive him, he was afraid for himself and retired beyond the river Jordan, and there abode, but obliging the barbarians to pay their taxes. Crazy, crazy, crazy. At this time, Seleucus, who was called Soter, reigned over Asia, being the son of Antiochus the Great. Joseph dies. And now Hyrcanus' father, Joseph, died. He was a good man and of great magnanimity, and brought the Jews out of a state of poverty and meanness to one that was more splendid. He retained the farm of the taxes of Syria and Phoenicia and Samaria 22 years. His uncle also Onias died about this time and left the high priesthood to his son Simon. And when he was dead, Onias, his son, succeeded him in that dignity. To him it was that Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, sent an embassage with an epistle and copy whereof here follows. Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias sendeth greeting. We have met with a certain writing, whereby we have discovered that both the Jews and the Lacedaemonians are of one stock, and are derived from the kindred of Abraham. It is but just, therefore, that you, who are our brethren, should send to us about many of your concerns as you please. We will also do the same thing, and esteem your concerns as our own, and will look upon your concerns as in common with yours. And will look upon our concerns as in common with yours. Demosthenes, who brings you this letter, will bring your answer back to us. This letter is our foursquare, and the seal is an eagle with a dragon in his claws. That sounds very familiar, does it not? Ghetto, what you talking about? An eagle with a dragon in his claws is the seal. That almost sounds like the seal for Mexico, and the eagle with the serpent in his claw was what the Mexique were to look for, or to look out for, when they were to find their promised land, when they were following their leader, Mexica, the Mexique. A lot of people say Mexica was actually Moses, and the Mexique are the original Mexicans. Oh, we gonna get there, people. We gonna get there. Meshi and his people, the Mexica, who found their promised land with an eagle, with a snake or a dragon, dragon in its claws, sitting atop a cactus. Man, let's keep going. And these, number 11, and these were the contents of the epistle, which was sent from the king of the Lacedaemonians. But upon the death of Joseph, the people grew seditious on account of his sons. For as the leaders made war against Hyrcanus, who was the youngest of Joseph's sons, the multitude was divided. But the greater part joined with the elders in this war, as did Simon the high priest, by reason of his kin to them. However, Hyrcanus determined not to return himself to Jerusalem anymore, but seated himself beyond Jordan, and was at perpetual war with the Arabians, and slew many of them, and took many of them captives. He also erected a strong castle, and built it entirely of white stone to the very roof, and had animals of a prodigious magnitude engraving upon it. He also drew round it a great and deep canal of water. He also made caves of many furlongs in length, by hollowing a rock that was over against him. And then he made large rooms in it for some feasting, and some for sleeping and living in. He introduced also a vast quantity of waters which ran along it, and which were very delightful and ornamental in the court. But he still made the entrances at the mouth of the caves so narrow that no more than one person could enter by them at once. And the reason why he built them after that manner was a good one. It was for his own preservation, lest he should be besieged by his brethren and run the hazard of being caught by them. Moreover, he built courts of greater magnitude than ordinary, which he adorned with vastly large gardens. And when he had brought the place to this state, he named it Tyre or Tyre. Man. This is in the section Hyrcanus builds places of defense. This place is between Arabia and Judea, beyond Jordan, not far from the country of Heshbon. And he ruled over those parts for 7 years, even all the time that Seleucus was king of Syria. But when he was dead, his brother Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes, took the kingdom. We're getting good. Ptolemy also, the king of Egypt, died, who was besides called Epiphanes. He left 2 sons, both young in age. The elder was called Philometor, and the younger Physcon. As for Hyrcanus, when he saw that Antiochus or Antiochus, people are sensitive about how you pronounce this name, had a great army and feared lest he should be caught by him and brought to punishment for what he had done to the Arabians, he ended his life and slew himself with his own hand, while Antiochus seized upon all his substance. Chapter 5. Let's leave it here at the beginning of chapter 5 today, gang. We got a lot more to dig in on. This has been amazing. This is really good. As always, gang, any questions, comments, critiques, criticisms, you know where to reach me. His Ghetto Point of View at gmail.com. Any prayer requests, His Ghetto Point of View at gmail.com. Any collaboration requests, His Ghetto Point of View at gmail.com. Catch me on IG. Also be on the Discord. It's all by the same name. And the TikTok. Bear with me, gang. Bear with me. I'm trying to get it all together. But in the meantime, in between time, you can just hit me on His Ghetto Points of View at gmail.com. All one word. Thankful to the Most High for all the blessings that He brings into you and your family's life, all the lessons and blessings He brings to me and my family each and every day. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hey, yeah. Had to drop that in there. You know what I'm saying? I am. I mean, He is. I am. That breath of life, that. Man, much love to the tribe. We're going to get out of here. We'll be back with that next part as we keep this Hanukkah train going down the road. And man, thank y'all for rocking and vibing. Tell a friend and tell a friend. We digging deep. We still got a lot more to go. And it will be fun. Let's keep it going. Peace, family.